It's been one of the key focal points in India-US relations now for several months. Will there or will there not be a trade deal? There's a sense of cautious optimism, but it's been going up and down. We've seen a lot of rhetoric, primarily from Washington, but there is an effort now at fixing the differences which may exist or may have existed in the equation between Washington and New Delhi to get this done. Joining us to talk a little bit about that, somebody who knows the India-US relationship inside out, Ambassador Atul Kashyap, President of the US-India Business Chamber, USIBC. Thanks very much. Welcome back to India.
Thank you, Vishnu, and it's great to see you in person.
Great to have you and chat with you as well. First up, the big story is, in a sense, President Donald Trump's statement where he said that, he was optimistic in a sense of India seizing our import of Russian oil. And then there's a statement from New Delhi which actually says that we're looking to diversify energy imports, potentially looking at the United States as well. How would you look at both of these remarks?
So I've been talking for a few months about the need for a glide path, because when a country as large as India, with as much energy demand as India, reallocates its energy imports, it has to be done gradually, lest there be energy shock and food shock, not only for India, but all around the world. So what I get from these remarks is that the United States and Indian governments are clearly talking. They're talking in a constructive way, and they must be talking along those lines about how a transition can happen, because India cannot turn on a dime. The Indian people need to have power and electricity to fuel their economic rise. So this must be done in a phased manner, and I would imagine that's probably what they're talking about. But this actually creates an opportunity, Vishnu, because our countries can actually work together in a complete array of energy consumption and production areas: nuclear, renewables, oil and gas. And of course, the American hydrocarbons are not subject to any geographic or supply chain choke points. So I see this as actually an area for potential collaboration, even as the overall bilateral relationship is also starting to warm up again.
I found that statement of President Trump, the last bit, quite interesting, that this would be perhaps an interim move, and that India, once the war between Russia and Ukraine ends, might then go back to importing Russian oil. So is that essentially the contours of a quote-unquote deal?
Well, I can't speak for the president.
Yeah, I can't. Having your opinion.
I can't speak for the president, but he was very clear in the Oval. He said that he wants this war to end. Yeah. And he feels that the method by which this war ends is if Russia cannot generate the revenue it needs to sustain it. The president spoke very clearly about the fact that the Russians have lost over 1 million of their citizens in this war. And so if this is the means by which the war ends, and there is some sort of reset in international relations, then who's to say what the future may hold? Things could go back to normal. But the need of the hour is for the war to end, and I think all countries that are shocked by the bloodletting should contribute. And it's good that the US and India are having constructive discussions on this and on the trade issues.
Ensuring stable energy prices and secured supplies have been the twin goals of our energy policy. This is what Delhi says. If India were to step up the import of hydrocarbons, for example, from the United States, we would be looking for the best price. And that's obviously where India derives an advantage from Russia. How would one work through that potential difference?
Well, this potentially has a government-to-government dimension, but it also has a government to corporate or even corporate to corporate dimension. And this is where the two governments can have a role in creating a structure and a framework that ensures that the glide path makes sense for the Indian consumer and keeps the lights on here in a way that is manageable for the Indian system. So again, these issues are best managed in private. I'm glad that the governments are discussing. There's an Indian trade delegation in Washington right now. The members of USIBC, both Indian and American, have been vociferous and vocal in their desire for an ambitious and helpful and meaningful trade agreement between the two countries. It is good that we're talking again. We had the Indian Commerce Minister.
Were you ever not talking?
Well, at a certain point, I think we were talking on the TV cameras. So it's always better to talk in private when you're having a difficult.
But that's an interesting point. Since when have things really stepped up by way of conversation and negotiations?
Well, just in the past, I would say 6 weeks to 8 weeks, there have been 2 phone calls between the President and the Prime Minister. You will have noticed that Ambassador Gore has now been confirmed by the Senate, and he was here very recently and met the Prime Minister and other officials. There is an Indian trade delegation in Washington today. There was one in New York during UNGA. The pace of engagement is quite intense. That's good. That means that we are getting back to business. And speaking for the business community, that's exactly what the business community wants. In fact, if the U.S. and India can get the trade deal resolved and finalized, if they can work out a glide path on Russian oil, then there is, I think, no limit to what we can do together. One of the critical needs of the hour is working on critical minerals. If India, for instance, were to help the United States figure out how to solve the critical mineral conundrum, using friendships that we have all around the world and using our capability, and lets us escape from having others control the pinch points on critical minerals, that will be a great thing for India, America, and all of humanity. So
how would India do that potentially?
Well,
in terms of critical minerals, I mean, are we looking at mining in India, exploring for critical minerals in India, a larger
Well,
US
first of all,
business
I think there's a lot of demand that would come out of America and India for those critical minerals. I think India has the know-how, the U.S. has the know-how, our companies do as well. We would need to build the capability, not just in America and India, but frankly among partners around the world. We would need to enhance the sourcing in countries like Chile and in India and America to ensure that our industries are supplied with what they need. But this requires focus. And it's not just on critical minerals, it's also on things like pharmaceuticals. You know, we have to eliminate pinch points in the supply chain that are controlled by other people. The pandemic has taught us that. If we can get through the trade agreement, if we can get through the Russian oil and get on a glide path, let's start working on the real challenges that we face together in the 21st century. And let's double down on the AI investments and the research and all the other frontier technologies where we work well together.
I'm going to talk about all of these points, but first up, there's the ASEAN summit. That's on the 25th and 26th of this month. Do you foresee a meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi?
Well, the mood music has substantially improved, so I can't say for certain, but I hope there would be a meeting. And I think a meeting would be good. In fact, if it offers the opportunity for both to close the trade deal, that would be magnificent.
So that was my next question. Would that meeting be premised, to your mind, as somebody who's sort of seen the system, would that be premised on a trade deal having been arrived at, more or less?
Dates are helpful in focusing governments. It gives them a limiting factor for negotiations. But really, governments conclude deals when they are ready. And often that involves politics, domestic politics in both countries. You know, President Trump has a domestic constituency, Prime Minister Modi does as well. That's the complicating factor and joy of governing massive, diverse democracies. So who's to say if that summit and the deadline of that summit will actually drive an outcome? But I do think both governments are hopeful to conclude the deal by the end of this year.
I briefly met Ambassador Gore when he was over here, and I mean, we went through that statement of his very carefully. In fact, he gave that statement to NDTV as well. He's upbeat clearly about the equation, the relationship, besides sort of checking out his new home when he comes over here in a couple of months from now. How important was that visit in terms of figuring out where both countries are, considering that we haven't been in the greatest place a few weeks or a few months back?
So I view that visit as having sent a very powerful message of reassurance and almost kind of a reset for the relationship. You know, the way that he was confirmed so speedily by the Senate, how quickly he came out here right after being confirmed, how well he was received in India, to me indicates that Delhi and Washington are trying to have a reset and to get back on the important path related to the work that must get done between our countries.
Was that the takeaway, that things are okay, or was there anything more substantive? That was there perhaps a takeaway that a trade deal will get done, that there were indicators from New Delhi which suggested that the differences were more or less closing?
Well, look, I'm not part of the government anymore, so I don't have direct knowledge, but what I hear is that both sides have, to quote an old Star Trek saying, have gone where no one has gone before. So let's hope that some innovation and new ideas have come that would allow us finally to achieve that. I have been militating for a trade deal between the United States and India since many years ago in my government career. It has been elusive, it has been difficult. Our political exigencies on both sides have gotten in the way. If we can actually pull this off, then there's so much more work we can achieve together. So I wish both governments every success.
You use the words political exigencies. One of the things which President Trump has been repeatedly saying is that he brought an end to the conflict between India and Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. I've been part of briefings where, the timeline which was spelt out to us seemed to indicate that there was no US role at all. It was Pakistan that came to the ceasefire table. And yet this keeps coming up over and over again. It is sensitive, obviously, for India, as you can imagine. Do you believe statements like that don't help the process that you're talking about, getting a trade deal done?
Well, there has clearly been a lot of water that has flowed both down the Potomac and the Yamuna since that moment. And I think both governments have put a lot of effort into trying to get us back to a more stable equilibrium. So I don't want to rehash all of that. What's been said and done is behind us. We should really look to the future. If you look at the anxieties that my government and my country have about supply chains and about the reliance that we have on other countries, there is an opportunity for the US and India to move beyond some of the rhetoric of the summer and refocus on the important work at hand that both of our governments have been working on for a long time.
So let's talk a little bit about the specifics. We've discussed critical materials, minerals. Let's talk about AI. It's one of the key points which have come up in bilateral discussions between both sides. What is the future as far as AI is concerned? And I also ask this because of Google's massive investment in Andhra Pradesh just a couple of days back.
Right.
How is that an area which is, endless possibility-wise?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's an enormous amount of investment by American companies in India, Indian companies in America. Just in the last week or two, we've seen announcements by Eli Lilly, by Google, by Anthropic, and so many others, Qualcomm. The list goes on. And that is also true of Indian companies in America. They're all members of USIBC. What business wants is for Delhi and Washington to send a clear signal of their recommitment to one another, and a clear signal that investments in both directions are good for both countries and are welcomed by both governments. Industry also wants predictability. It wants a feeling that these efforts on AI and all the other frontier technologies are officially encouraged, especially between our two countries. And so if our governments can send that signal through the trade deal, then you will see, I think, even more investment in both directions, which is good for both of us. I would also say that it's very important that the governments understand that the free movement of skilled workers is also critical to the development of these technologies and ensures the efficiency of our companies in being able to achieve that vision.
One of the key areas where America and India have partnered is defense, and there's that incredible deal, a huge deal on jet engines which has been signed. It has to be implemented. There are concerns here about the pace of implementation. Be that as it may, India is strategically autonomous, and in as much as several American leaders have said that, why is India continuing to import Russian weapon systems? That's not going to go away. If anything, that's going to continue apace, based on our own experiences, very recently, in fact, with Russian weapon systems. Is that something America will have to accept?
I think America does accept that. If you look at the statements over the years by successive U.S. governments, there's an understanding that a country that has such an enormous legacy stockpile of Russian equipment cannot turn on a dime. This is the same point about the Russian oil. But there can be a glide path. And if you look at India's acquisitions over the past 20 years, there have been more and more acquisitions of American platforms that have served India very well. I think the feeling in the States is certainly India can have its continuing relations with other countries because that is India's sovereign right. But from the American perspective, there is also a desire to have India do more with us. So if it's more drones, or it's more transport aircraft, or it's more fighter aircraft, or more helicopters, everybody has a paratha. Every one of those parathas wants a little bit of mukkan. U.S. side also wants that. It's reasonable.
The words linking and delinking of India and Pakistan has been a cause of concern over here in New Delhi. We keep seeing new statements by the American leadership at various levels sort of appearing to link India and Pakistan. If there's a statement on Pakistan, then there's a statement on India. And we don't like that because we've always valued a relationship with New Delhi, which is very different from any relationship America may have with anyone else. Therefore, this linking is potentially problematic. It is problematic. Is that something America needs to think about deeply?
So I was on a program the other day where I talked about how the rhetoric in our relationship had been sort of stripped away and the reality had been exposed. And I'm very worried about that as someone who has worked as hard as I can to build the full potential of U.S.-India relations for decades. The joint statements by both governments have always reflected our highest aspirations for each other. But the last few months have laid bare a reality. And when that reality is laid bare, then it behooves us to transition to two more R's, rhetoric to reality, and then relevance and reciprocity.
There is terrorism which comes from that part of the world. And therefore, I think many in India would expect a more consistent statement from the United States.
It's a fair point, Vishnu. There are so many people in my old world of military officers, intelligence officers, diplomats, who will never forget the lessons of Tora Bora, or of Abbottabad, or of Mumbai, or of 1,000 other things. But the U.S. is moving at a tremendous pace right now. If you look at the ambitions of this administration, it has a sweeping vision of what it intends to do, not only within the United States, but in America's relationships around the world. It is trying to reshape things in ways that are happening very rapidly, and I think that pace of change will even accelerate. So, as much as we all heed the lessons of history, there are current exigencies and current demands that our friends in Islamabad have frankly figured out how to be relevant about. And we can not like it, and we can, maybe even critique it, but the truth is they have adjudged very clearly where their relevance is to the Washington that exists now. Not the Washington of rhetoric or the Washington of imagination, but the Washington of right now.
Right. I would suggest that the bedrock of our relationship is people, people to people. I mean, these are historic links and these are very important links. I just want to understand whether America's new policy, for example, on H-1B visas, is something that potentially would drive away many Americans from seeking many Indians from seeking the great American dream. And I'll give you an example. When any number of college students spend crores of rupees to get into American universities, they want a free opportunity or a free chance, a fair chance at living their American dream, getting a job in America and carrying on. And, that's the way it's been. That road, that path is now almost shut. And that disturbs a lot of people over here. Does that take away from the relationship between people at one stage, at one level?
Yeah, it's a fair point. Look, I think what you're running into is domestic politics in the United States. This is not so much about India as it is about the heartland. And the feeling that has been expressed among the voters who did vote for President Trump and for J.D. Vance, that American young people are not getting enough of an opportunity for good quality, high-paying jobs so that they can also build their American dream.
Right.
So obviously the H-1Bs are the leading edge of that sentiment, but the H-1Bs are not just an Indian visa category, even though the preponderance go to Indians because of the amazing skills of the Indian people and the talent that they bring to companies in both directions, the innovation that they bring. But it really is a reflection of domestic politics. If you look at other things like the president's announcement on pharmaceuticals, it may look like it's directed toward India. It's actually directed toward a desire to rebuild our capability at home. So much of this is driven by a domestic political impetus about making America great again. And part of that, when you look at MAGA Twitter, is a steady drumbeat that they feel that their children are not able to get jobs. So I think if you understand it from that prism, then you can start to understand that this is more about us than about India, frankly. Right. But it, of course, has an impact on India, a disproportionate impact, and on Indians. The other thing I would say is that it is important that there be talent mobility in order for our companies to continue to be at the forefront of innovation. But the ecosystem of the United States, especially in Silicon Valley, is not easily reproduced. And so companies and governments will have to introspect about what it takes to fuel innovation, even in the face of these increasing restrictions on talent mobility, and how you kind of capture the lightning in the jar that is Silicon Valley. Because if it were easy to do, it would have happened all around the world. Yeah. It takes real focus and effort in order to create that. And I hope that we as Americans will be able to retain that for a long time to come, because it has fueled our innovation and our prosperity for many decades. And I do hope that there will be some adjustment over time on the skilled worker visas and other forms of immigration that allow us to retain our innovation.
I think the flip side of Americans seeking more jobs and more opportunities in your own country, which is your birthright, is that international students would find it less attractive to go to America, spend crores of rupees potentially, and that doesn't do well for your universities. I mean, Indian students are among the largest, if not the largest, international cohort of students.
Right.
American universities earn a great deal from Indians. So it's something which would be disadvantageous to your universities at a very basic level, I would suggest.
Yes, no, it's a fair point. I think that we have to roll out the welcome mat because America's great genius has been its immigration, innovation, entrepreneurship engine. And part of that is bringing kids from all around the world to study in America, learn our ways of life, our systems. You know, when I was in government service, the first thing I would look at when I was looking at the bio of an official with whom I was about to meet was to see whether they had studied in America. And if they had, it created an immediate connection. So that's a very valuable and precious thing that I hope we will continue to sustain.
One or two questions. Our Prime Minister was in Tianjin recently. There's a reset in the relationship with China. Some would suggest that the strategic partnership between our countries is premised on concerns over China. Is that changing?
I don't think it is. I think that long term, the challenge posed by China in terms of its overproduction, its intense focus on pinch points in global supply chains creates a conundrum for Delhi, for Washington, for the Europeans, for powers all around the world. Nobody wants someone else to control their own nation's vitality and prosperity and access to technology. I think you're probably going to see a lot of conversations between Delhi and Washington about how to ensure our independence. I don't think we're in it to sort of tie the other guy down or infringe his ability to be prosperous, but we don't want anyone else doing that to us. That was Abe Shinzo's vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. I think that logic is going to continue to drive us. We've been through kind of a blip and an adjustment. You know, Washington is a very new Washington. There's a new politics in Washington. But longer term, these strategic tendencies, I think, are going to continue to drive us and frankly drive us closer together.
A final question. We're talking about China. There's this huge allegation of Ashley Tellis, who's had a decisive role in Indo-US relations and the civil nuclear deal, being potentially a spy for China. Potentially and allegedly, I use those words repeatedly. Your thoughts on these allegations which have emerged?
Well, first of all, they're deeply shocking. And I've known Ashley for decades from his service in the U.S. government. Obviously a scholar of great renown in India and America and other places. Look, I go back to the principles of our judicial system. You are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The affidavit lays out some very serious allegations. In my old world, doing those kinds of things, if proven true, carry very serious consequences. So let's see where the court process goes. But this is a reminder that we all have to play by the rules, and indeed the rules protect us from precisely the kinds of threats that you and I have just been talking about.
All right, Atul Kashyap, wonderful speaking to you. Thank
Good
you very much.
Good to see you, Vishnu.
Ambassador Atul Kashyap, an old India hand, somebody who's really worked hard to build up this relationship, ups and downs. We've seen some significant downs, but are we at the stage where we can actually say that the relationship has been righted? Are we close to a trade deal? Will there be a meeting soon between Trump and Modi? We'll have to wait and see. For the moment, from all of us here, goodbye.